in, and then I'm gonna mute my mic so I'm not interrupting y'all, and have fun.
Hi, welcome. Hello. Looks like the waiting room has been opened, and we've got all of our, I'm getting some entries here. People coming in. For anyone who is logging in and would benefit from a script of today's presentation, I'm making a link to a Google Doc, which has our script. I'll give you a moment to get set up. Okay. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for choosing to spend part of your afternoon here with us. Thank you so much to the Visitor Experience Conference for inviting MoCA Cleveland, and also for the extra work that you have done to pivot this conference to a virtual presentation. My name is Nicole Ledinek, and I serve as the Curator of Education and Engagement at MoCA Cleveland. And together with my colleagues Melissa Kansky and Elizabeth Culp, we'd like to tell you a little bit about what Becoming Learner Center means for MoCA Cleveland. We're very interested in your questions, and we'd like to take those at the end of our presentation, which will be roughly about 30-35 minutes. If it's useful for you to put those in the chat as we go along, please do. So if I could have the next slide, please. So it's our names and our titles here for you. In the order of our presentation as well. May I have the next slide, please? All right, so we have at MoCA Cleveland made some big changes. We've gone from visitor services to learner engagement, or being in collaboration with our learners. So today we're going to break that journey up for you into 3 parts. I'm going to share some of the organizational changes and the thinking that's gotten us to where we are, and introduce a new position at the museum, which is the Thoma Engagement Guide Apprenticeship role. My colleague Melissa is going to elaborate on how we hired and selected that cohort and how they're positively influencing the learner environment. And my colleague Elizabeth is going to share how our entire team works as a professional learning community and the impact our approach has on learners. We have the next slide, please. So to give you a snapshot of where we are right now, this quote came from late last year in the fall. This is the best engagement I have ever experienced at a museum. This is definitely a quote that I look to often, and I hold as evidence as the many changes and the significant team effort that's happened over the last several years to make the museum more welcoming and collaborative for all audiences. But like any good story or any good journey, knowing where we started is important too. So if we could turn the clocks back to 2014 with the next slide, please. Lack of content and rude personnel made this place a no-go for me. Ouch. So this is just one line of a very long Yelp review from 2014. And since then, there have been some big changes, both structural and ideological, over the last several years. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how we went from being a no-go to best engagement. So I want to set the stage for what the MoCA museum experience is. We have the next slide, please. So MoCA was founded in 1968, and in 2012, we opened our first and only permanent building, and that's pictured here. If you haven't been before, it is a compact and focused museum experience. There are 4 floors. It's about 34,000 square feet. And something that sets this mid-sized museum apart from other museum experiences, especially or even other contemporary art museums, is that we do not have a collection. We rotate out our exhibitions about 3 times a year. And in the first few years of being open, especially that first year, our attendance doubled, and we did a lot of surveying of our audiences, and it revealed, some patterns that it reveals, that our drop-in visitors felt like there wasn't enough art, and that for the price of admission, the visit felt too short. And also a very common comment we heard was that I just don't get it. I don't get the art. Repeat visitation is an important measure of success for MoCA, and something that we noticed that was bringing people back to the museum was after they had a guided experience with a staff member. And this could have been with an educator, it could have been with a curator, it could have really been anyone, but it was a guided experience, or a moment when we slowed them down, or slowed our visitors down, and we facilitated that moment, that it related to the visitors' questions, to their curiosities. And that mattered because it made it a personalized experience for that individual visitor. Next slide, please. So even though those interactions between staff and our visitors, or our learners, were successful, there really wasn't much consistency in how staff led those interactions. So not only would each staff person use a different approach with viewers, there also wasn't any coordination between those audience-facing roles. So as I've already shared, MoCA is a concise experience, and especially in compared to bigger encyclopedic art museums, it's not a sprawling interpretive environment. So you do encounter staff often, and some of the key locations or experiences is that you would have a transaction with the visitor services, and that is at the upper left image. Once you went into the exhibition spaces, there would be a gallery attendant who would be silently monitoring you. And then, and that is pictured in the bottom right. And then we have our hands-on learning lab spaces, which you can see in the upper right, which are generally, or have been generally, self-guided spaces. Next slide, please. So one way that we imagine being more welcoming and collaborative with our visitors was if they were to have a more consistent and cohesive experience with all of the staff that they encountered. And so the idea was to place their experience even more at the center of our visitor-facing work. So to do this, we made two significant changes to the reporting structures within the museum. As part of that reorganization, the 3 key staff roles have been modified and a new position has been created in order for the on-site experience to be more learner-centered. In 2016, visitor services moved from the transactionally focused operations department into the engagement department. The manager of guest services became the visitor engagement manager, and the team of roughly 5 visitors became the visitor engagement associates. So something you should know about me is that I'm trained as a museum educator, and in my tenure, I've directly worked with a large number of museum visitors. So something that was key for me during this transition was thinking of how the engagement manager and the associates, how those positions were framed. So instead of the transactional role, these were reimagined as museum educators. So the administrative duties central to these roles remained, and what was included was training in how to support people in having a personally relevant experience at MoCA, or thinking of visitors as learners. Ooh, I need to take a break. So in 2019, another structural change was made in that the gallery attendants, whose priorities were facility and artwork conservation, were transitioned out of security and into a new position. The visitor engagement associate role and the gallery attendant role were merged and transformed to become the Thoma engagement guide apprenticeship role. So this new position is a new way of working for the museum. And Melissa and Elizabeth are going to share a lot about that position. And their work, or our work, is to work in intentional ways to transform the moment for a visitor. All right, so if I can have the next slide. So as a team of museum educators, we are trained and apply various education engagement methods that will best serve the goals and learning styles of our visitors. So few come in self-identifying themselves as students, but in my experience, many do acknowledge that learning is a part of their museum agenda. So the engagement guides, they work throughout the museum. They use the educational theorist George Hines' mandate that our work is to transform them from visitors to users of the museum. To do this, engagement guides model how to be a user of the museum. Our approach is to be curious, to emphasize the importance of conversation, connection, collaboration, experimentation, and reflection. And because the majority of MoCA visitors are adults, we look to Malcolm Nell's adult learner characteristics to shape those intentional interactions. So some of these characteristics of adult learners include honoring that they need to have a self-directed experience, that adults learn best when they are collaborators in the process. Adults' lived experience is incredibly important, and they need to have opportunities to apply that knowledge to the situations that they find themselves in the museums, and that the visit must be relevant to their goals. So those are some of the things, the ideas that inform our work. Next slide, please. So at this point, you may be wondering a little bit about how these big structural changes, these big organizational changes have been financially supported. And MoCA is the inaugural recipient of the Bold Initiatives Grant, which is part of the Carl and Marilyn Thoma Art Foundation. And this grant specifically exists to support small and mid-sized institutions and museums willing to take bold steps to increase its audience. So as I've said before, MoCA's aim is to make our museum more welcoming and collaborative for all audiences. And the Bold Initiatives Grant helped create the Thoma Engagement Guide apprenticeship position. It also helped us go free without admission forever. And it also created that new position that I mentioned earlier, which is the Thoma Education Fellow. And this particular role is focused on the on-site learning experience, but it also takes a very active role in shaping the engagement guide early career professionals. Melissa Kansky, our next speaker, does hold that role. And so I'd like to turn it over to her so she can share a little bit about that and tell us more about the engagement guide apprenticeship. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, for that history of how we got to where we are now. As Nicole mentioned, my name is Melissa, and I'm the Thoma Education Fellow. A large part of my role is creating on-site interpretive experiences that help learners make meaning from the exhibitions and build a relationship with the museum. So like the Thoma Engagement Guide Apprenticeship Program, or TIGA as we sometimes call it, my role is part of this larger effort to increase learner engagement. And the TIGA program is one piece of how we have shifted the way we work in order to build a learning community with those who choose to come to MoCA and also among staff. So I'm going to share a little bit about how we structured that hiring process to build a learning community of engagement professionals. You can go to the next slide, please. Great. So it was really important that we recognize that the staff working with the public is a professional role and that there's a unique set of skills that make someone successful in this position. So we want to interrogate the behaviors that allowed someone to be successful as an engagement guide. And it was really important to us that someone modeled curiosity and creative thinking. As Nicole shared, the engagement guides work in different areas of the museum, and that because we are a non-collecting institution, the exhibitions are constantly changing. And so we wanted someone who is flexible and can adapt to this constantly evolving work environment. We also wanted someone who is reflexive or reflective, and so that they are able to think about their own practice and refine their strategies to continuously improve the experience for our learners. And we wanted someone who was team-oriented and understood how their contributions affected the larger group. And even though the staff facilitates experiences for those who come to MoCA, we wanted a team that saw themselves as learners and were really committed to their own growth and development in this role. You can go to the next slide, please. Great. So we then developed an interview process that allowed us to identify these behaviors in the staff. And so it was really important to us that we understood how someone approached their work more than what they knew about art history or art practices or nonprofits and museum studies. And so the written questionnaire and the in-person interview asked them questions that helped us understand their work style, their attitudes towards different ages of learners, their professional goals, and how they express their interest and enthusiasm for art and culture. Go to the next slide. The in-person interview was also a group interview. And so part of this process reflected what we expected them to do in their role. As part of the interview, we asked them to prepare and lead an engagement experience that focused on one aspect of the museum architecture. And during this, the other candidates and the hiring managers were the learners. And so we're able to observe how an engagement guide would facilitate an interaction, how they responded to ideas and questions from learners, how they verbally guided someone in the space and used their body language, and also how they showed enthusiasm for their work. We really wanted a team that inspired joy and wonder in the museum. We go to the next slide. And so as we've mentioned, in addition to working in the galleries, the engagement guides also support experiences in the learning labs. And so we wanted to understand how the candidates would encourage personal meaning making, how they encourage personal expression, and invite learners to experiment with different materials. We like to say that MoCA's programs, exhibitions, and experiences are rooted in experimentation. And so we gave the candidates a variety of materials and asked them to consider the materials provided and together develop an art making prompt that would invite learners to experiment and push boundaries. Go to the next slide. So we gave them about 15 minutes to work collaboratively to develop this art making experience. And then we asked them questions so we understood their process and how they worked together and how they made space for each other's ideas. And so the group interview process also centered that team approach that we were looking for. So we understood how they would collaborate and help each other grow and refine each other's ideas. You can go to the next slide, please. So for us, the interview structure allowed different ways for the candidates to demonstrate their strengths. Part of the design of the Thoma Engagement Guide Apprenticeship Program is working towards addressing inequities that are embedded in the museum structure, including hiring practices and preferred academic achievements. And so this hiring process allowed us to select a cohort that represents different areas of knowledge, experiences, and perspectives, yet still meet the demands of that engagement guide role. You can go to the next slide. So as you can see, there was not a specific degree that we were looking for when hiring for the engagement guide position. This is really just one snapshot. As the engagement guide program continues, there are engagement guides who come onto the team, and there are some who roll off, but this is a good snapshot of the different degrees that the cohort holds. You can go to the next one. And similarly, there was not a specific area of academic focus that we were looking for when hiring. The team represents a variety of different areas of knowledge, and because of that, they're able to learn from each other different possible connections that someone can recognize in the art and different ways of interpreting and discussing the artwork. Because of this, they also model the different ways someone can build a relationship with a contemporary art museum. And so they show that you don't need to have expertise in art making practices or art history to find meaning in the exhibitions, and that everyone has enough skill and knowledge as soon as they come to the museum, and everyone's area of expertise is enough. You can go to the next one, please. So we also asked about their professional goals when hiring, and our interest in workforce development underscores that while they are part of the staff, they are also learners, and we as an organization are invested in their professional growth and development. You can go to the next slide as well. Thank you. And so the hiring process helped us select a team that would foster a learning community, both for those who choose to experience MoCA and who build a learning community among staff. We structured daily and weekly meetings to support their learning and to help cultivate a reflective and reflexive practice. I will now turn it over to Elizabeth, who's our visitor engagement manager, and will share more about the goals for these meetings and how they translate to a positive experience for our learners.
Thank you so much, Melissa and Nicole, and hello, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here with you digitally today. As it's been mentioned, my name is Elizabeth, and I am the Visitor Engagement Manager at MoCA Cleveland, which means I'm also the day-to-day manager of the Thoma Engagement Guide apprentices, though I share management duties with several other colleagues at our institution. As Melissa shared, we have built a structure into the daily operations of the museum to establish and nourish a professional learning community. I'll share a little bit about what that means at MoCA, what it looks like in practice, and how it positively impacts learner experience. But first, how do we define professional learning community? At MoCA Cleveland, it's a community of adult learners committed to combining theory, skill set, and practice to continually improve their own abilities for their own professional development and the museum learner's experience. Together, we're focused on learning rather than lecturing, working collaboratively and consistently, and holding ourselves and each other accountable with care for results. We are a community that privileges open-ended questions, constructive feedback, and self-directed learning. We provide resources and coaching, but it is up to each individual to prioritize their own growth. As Melissa mentioned, there are different meeting formats where we flex and stretch our learning community muscles. There are informal, coached conversations at the start of each shift that typically last 15 minutes and allow time for us to reach a shared understanding of our focus for the day, and also time to share how we're approaching the day. So how will you show up for your colleagues, for yourself, and for learners? What skills are you working on building? And what might prevent you from being your best today? And how can we as a team support you? We then have post-shift reflection meetings, which last 30 minutes and are more focused and responsive to the day's needs. There are opportunities for managers to notice where support is needed and to circle back to the intentions set at the start of the day. Conversation prompts are specific and strategic, focused on improving our practice and continuing our shared learning. Some examples are, what happened today that required you to work in a way that was unfamiliar or an uncommon way of working? Or, what successes do you want to share so that we can learn from effective interactions? Or, based on today's work, what questions do you have about our goals, strategies, and intended outcomes? And finally, there are formal, organized learning sessions led by TIGA managers, led by engagement guides, and also by other cultural professionals. The topics range and are responsive to the needs of the cohort. Previous sessions have covered working with early learners, visual literacy, checking your bias, correcting with care, inclusive language, surveillance of Black bodies in museums, de-escalation training, microaggressions, mindfulness, and beyond. These learning sessions reinforce a core component of the TIGA cohort. We all fill the role of coach and learner. Everyone has something to teach, and everyone has something to learn. The intent behind our meetings is to nourish the professional learning community, and I'd like to share some feedback from a current engagement guide, sharing how the meetings support their professional practice. Natalie started with MoCA as a visitor engagement associate and then interviewed to make the transition to become a Thoma engagement guide apprentice. Natalie writes, reflective practice is a part of the work culture. During post-shift meetings, management team asks what went well today and what didn't go well today. It's less about I screwed up and more about this is how I can change it. The questions show we're focused on opportunities for growth. The professional learning community models the way we want to engage and build relationships with learners. Through empathy, care, reflection, and inquiry. The learning community helps develop and reinforce team communication and collaboration, and provides a learning experience that is coordinated and supportive throughout the museum. The engagement guide who greets you upon entry has had the same training as the engagement guide who supports your investigation of an artwork. The engagement guide leading an art making experience digitally has also worked in the galleries to support preventative conservation. No matter where you encounter someone from the engagement team, you're going to have an intentional, informed, and consistent experience. Prior to the Thoma Engagement Guide apprenticeship, learners shared some facts about their experience, and they had the following to say about their time on site. Wow, don't go, a total waste of time. Still stings. And the content is painfully forgettable. Within the first 6 months of the Thoma Engagement Guide apprenticeship being introduced, learners shared the following. This is what museums should be. Another learner shared, I have never felt comfortable here at MoCA in the past, but today I feel very comfortable. The young man at the front desk made me feel like I belong, so that's why I decided to check out this gallery space. Morgan, a current engagement guide who started her tenure with MoCA as an intern, had the following to say about how the learning community translates to the museum learner. Morgan writes, I think reflection and sharing within our TIGA learning community are two important values that build connection and support within my team. This learning community focusing on feedback and care allows me to be introspective and intentional when engaging with any person who comes to MoCA by meeting them where they are and supporting their MoCA experience. We also work diligently to incorporate generosity, care, and thoughtfulness into our practice so learners enjoy their experience and are compelled to return. Melissa shared about how we interview and hire for generosity and care, and Nicole shared that one of our institutional goals focuses on repeat attendance. Since the beginning of Open House and the debut of the TIGA program, our repeat attendance has gone up by 284%, or from about 1,000 learners a year to over 6,000 repeat learners. MoCA defines repeat visitation as someone who has visited more than once within the last 12 months. We also, to create this culture of care for our learners, we acknowledge that first we have to infuse that care into our team. Care is reinforced by the way we ask all engagement staff to participate in our meetings. Follow 3 basic rules. Take space, or offer your experience and tell your story. Share space, or speak up and be sure to leave room for others to share too. And finally, hold space. Though not all engagement guide experiences are the same, comfortable, or easy to understand, they are welcomed and respected. The culture of care also means creating spaces that aren't purely focused on work, creating opportunities to check in with one another purely as human beings in the world in 2020. One engagement guide had this to say about the support they found from their colleagues. I have felt a strong sense of community within my team. I have experienced the importance of both connection and community through engaging with one another and learning from each other. Tea Time with TIGAs, a digital meetup for TIGAs only, allowed me to continue the genuine conversations with my coworkers and continue to learn and grow with one another by asking questions validating feelings, and discussing work and life in a pandemic. The community of care created by TIGAs in turn affects the learner experience, creating an empathetic and satisfying environment from learners. Here is what some of our learners had to say about their on-site experience. I grew up going to museums and bring my daughter to them a lot. We always feel looked at and monitored in a cold way. Here at MoCA, I feel something completely different. It is warm and welcoming. The engagement guides ask us questions, approach us, and make us feel like we belong. Another shared, the person on the second floor, which is a gallery space for those of you who haven't been in our building physically, was so helpful and kind. I was really touched by how kind he was. I was reading the other day and there was a quote about how if you give nothing else, you can give kindness. And that feels like it's embodied here. Thank you for creating this space. The learner feedback I have shared with you today is a direct result of the clear goals and desired outcomes we have set and shared with our engagement guides. We have learned that if you want visitors to your institution to feel a particular way or have a certain kind of experience, you first have to create those same feelings and values within your team. Fast forward to March of 2020, of course, COVID changed a lot about our work. MoCA Cleveland was closed to the public for 6.5 months. And in fact, we only just reopened on October 1st. We could not be in the physical space, which was an essential part of our work. However, the way of working we had established prior to March of 2020 allowed us to meaningfully pivot to engaging learners digitally. A shift to remote work allowed engagement guides to work in new ways with other departments like curatorial and marketing on projects that relate to their professional goals and aspirations. Engagement guides developed content, created artwork, and even starred in digital experiences designed for learner reflection, imagination, and inspiration. Engagement guides also joined conversations and work groups around upcoming exhibitions and institutional values, shaping the way we engage learners in the post-COVID world. While MoCA has reopened to the public, many of the ways of working developed during our closure will continue due to the demonstrated value this group of thoughtful and intentional museum professionals brings to the work of the museum. I also strongly encourage you to check out some of those videos. You can find them on our Facebook, I think, but I find them delightful. The TIGA program has had such a significant and palpable change in the way the museum works, internally and externally. We are committed to maintaining this program. The learner experience has profoundly changed. We went from complaints of not enough art to see in the entire building to learners spending 2.5 hours in just one gallery. For us, there is no going back. I want to thank you so much for your time and attention today, and we'd love to use our remaining time for any questions or dialogue. And I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I'm also happy to share my email address if you'd like to follow up for more conversation and collaboration. So thanks so much.
Thank you to Elizabeth and Melissa for sharing. And if there are any questions, you are welcome to unmute and ask. If you want to put those in the chat, we can look at them now. But is there anything that came up for anyone that you want us to share a little bit more about?
A question in the chat asking if your museums uses docents.
Yeah, so I'll take that question. Yes, MoCA has used docents in the past, and in fact, it was the primary way that we led guided education from the mid-'80s until very recently. There was a shift that I instituted about 2 or 3 years ago, where I wanted to move away from volunteer educators and towards a contracted educators, which is something that is not typical for the Cleveland area. We just don't really have enough demand for it. So I do believe that in the future, we may have to go back to that model, but for right now, we're really doubling down on training and getting right the engagement guide position. So I would say that that some engagement guides are able and have been able to step in a more extended educational guided experience. Now, some of their interactions are a few minutes, long, or maybe 10, 15 minutes, but we'd like to, but we have had them lead some, let's say, guided tours, and definitely they're leading some of the digital engagements as well.
All right, so we have two folks who would like to know about how you pursued institutional buy-in for this transformation.
I can start, but I also want to open up to Melissa and Elizabeth if you'd like to answer that. I don't need to be the one, but you can also just point at me too. Okay. All right. So institutional buy-in. I so appreciate that question. And it's something that I thought a lot about leading up to this change. Something that I didn't share is that I've worked with the museum for 15 years and I've seen it go through many changes and have had the pleasure to work with many different staff. So I really thought a lot about building up to this moment. So even before we made the organizational or structural changes in 2016, I was having conversations with my colleagues in security, in exhibitions, in operations, and we identified with our own language, we are also noticing similar challenges. And so I would say that there was a collective understanding that we needed to work in a different way. One of the things that I started to do in about late 2016, 2018 was I started to bring together the key managers that would be invested into this new way of working. So Elizabeth did share that there are several managers, and Melissa, Elizabeth, and I are 3 of them. We also work still with security and still with exhibitions. There is still, I would say, a process. The word becoming is important, that we are understanding how to collectively have an investment in this work. And so the training and onboarding and having people invested, I would say we've accomplished a lot. We're still tweaking, but there was a general consensus that we needed to move this way. But because we had never done it before, trusting the process, I would say, was the real work that the place that I spent a lot of time thinking about.
And then we have a logistical question. Are your staff all on the same work schedule to support these pre and post shift meetings, or are you working with staggered shifts?
I will happily take that one. I am a big fan of logistics when they work in my favor. So we have essentially the same shift each day. So currently all engagement guides begin at 10:30 and end at 5:30. So that means if you're working on the same day, you are able to attend those meetings collectively. However, not each engagement guide works each day of this group of managers, but also of this learning community is, I can sum up and send out to our whole team anything that really stands out as something that needs to be communicated right away. But we also work to allow for some staff overlap and some peer-to-peer training. And, perhaps my work is connecting an engagement guide from Thursday with an engagement guide from Saturday to say, you know, you really brought up an excellent question in our post shift. Would you mind sharing your takeaways with the team on Saturday? So it does take a little bit of extra work to make sure that we continue on that same page. I will say also our formalized learning sessions that happen when the museum is closed to the public help to tie up a lot of those loose ends, if you will. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, then we have another question here. Does your program also include one-on-one mentoring?
I can jump in with that one, and then please feel free to fill in the gaps of anything that I miss. But yes, it is a mix of these group conversations and then one-on-one coaching. As we had mentioned, we asked them specifically about the areas of the museum field that they were most interested in developing, and the skills that they were particularly interested in developing. And so for those who are more interested in youth programming and community engagement or museum education, I've worked with one-on-one to develop gallery talks and prepare 15-minute conversations about a particular artwork that they would lead and facilitate on our Saturday programming. And I've also worked with a few specifically within our digital programming to develop art making activities and open studio virtual programming that allow them to build those skills and to facilitate these experiences for those who want to experience MoCA. So specifically on projects, we have offered one-on-one mentoring, and I know Elizabeth and Nicole have worked with them, also one-on-one for a variety of other goals that they have expressed.
And if I can just add on to all of that excellent information that Melissa shared, we do let the engagement guides know that they can ask for or set up time with really any of MoCA staff to learn more about their work. So every engagement guide is at a different stage in their professional life. And so some are learning what it looks like to set up an informational interview, and some are exceptionally advanced and ready to ask more, I would say, complex questions of some of our colleagues. So really do emphasize that each person, each engagement guide is at a different, they are learners in their own way, and that they need something a little bit different. And we do really want to emphasize that they also need to come and ask for some of the things that they need. They need to be self-directed in their learning.
Okay, and then we have a question going back to the post-shift meetings. If they take place after the museum is closed, does that create overtime pay opportunities?
It's a great question. Certainly the schedule and timing is something that we have to closely monitor. They do take place after the museum is closed within a very specific window. So we close to the public at 5, and we need to be walking out the door, clocked out by 5:30 p.m. So it doesn't create an overtime pay situation. It is built into the budget as a non-negotiable. If we are staffing the museum, we need time to have these conversations. And that is also why it's so key that we do them consistently, because 30 minutes on its own is actually not that much time to digest your day and look forward. So doing it daily for shorter periods of time consistently is what allows us to, frankly, stay comfortably within our budget and accomplish the goals of this program.
All right. Well,